Kate's introduction, Chelsea and I, as Kate explained, both are actuaries, but we also both work for a technology company that transforms spreadsheets to cloud services. So we've both got pretty strong views about how actuaries and technology will sort of march forward into the future. What we want to do today is to share a few perspectives. Obviously, they're coming from our perspectives based on the company that we work for, but hopefully they will stimulate some thoughts amongst yourselves around how you kind of see the future of actuaries and technology. I think one of the challenges that we see in our day-to-day conversations with CFOs, chief actuaries, is that although there's tremendously interesting problems that actuaries are facing across the whole of the insurance industry, particularly in Asia, but that the majority of actuaries still have to be focused on the very core areas of getting ourselves organized on IFRS 17, on new capital regimes, on managing investment volatility, all of the kind of traditional actuarial areas, because actuaries are in demand. And so we find a little bit of a challenge in terms of the pace at which actuaries are adopting new technology, partly because everybody is just so busy. But equally, when we talk to people who are employers of actuaries, typically the slightly gruff CFO, then they will be saying, well, why is it that we have so many actuaries in the company? Why is my actuarial headcount continuing to expand? What are actuaries doing in order to automate the processes they use and to use technology more effectively? So I do really kind of feel we're at a bit of a crossroads, a bit of a tipping point in terms of actuaries and technology. And I'd like to just maybe try and illustrate that with an analogy from the sort of history of the internet. So for those of us who are a bit older in life, I was still around when, for example, there was an enthusiastic user of Yahoo back in Web 1.0. And in those days, Yahoo was something where you'd go in and you basically just click on links. It was fantastic at the time, but it was purely one-way information. And of course, the world we live in now is very much two-way, very much communicative. We're living in a world of WeChat and Grab and Facebook and Google and this tremendous convenience that we have in terms of being able to connect with each other and manage our work and our lives online. But it's still therefore raising some pretty massive questions around whether or not there's too much power concentrated in some of these organizations. And therefore, I think a big aspiration to move to the next generation, to Web 3.0, where there's going to be more decentralization, maybe decentralized finance. We access the web in different ways, maybe through sort of natural language. And so the themes of openness and connectivity are really seen as the future. But equally, when you start talking about what does Web 3.0 really mean, then you get different answers. And I think we're still not really at the point where Web 3.0 has a very concrete, tangible, realistic existence. It's tomorrow, it's not today. And so if you try and follow that analogy in terms of the actuarial universe, then again, when I was growing up as an actuary, actuaries were people who did the sums. They did calculate the prices, the premiums, the reserves, and basically then presented that to the rest of the company. And of course, the world we live in now is much more complex than that. We are, insurance is much more complex, finance is much more complex. We're right in the middle of the key issues in terms of how to manage that complexity. But I think we're still quite reliant on traditional methodologies and tools. And I think a lot of us kind of feel that the next generation of actuaries, which hopefully most of you on the line are going to be part of, that it's going to be, we're going to enhance our capabilities. We're going to not just be kind of projectors, but we're also going to be skilled in data science, in new technologies, in AI, in machine learning, and we're going to be much more multidisciplinary in terms of the way we work across different teams in different, maybe even in different industries. So this is all great, but you see what I mean? It's a little bit like the Web 3.0. It's a little bit aspirational. It's not totally clear which way it's going. And so what we'd like to do today is just to try and give a little bit of a perspective. It's just our perspective, but a little bit of perspective about how we see this can be made a little bit more concrete and a little bit more real in terms of the direction of travel for actuaries and technology. And so we're just going to discuss these four concepts here. Microservices, continuous integration, continuous development, and cloud, I think, go together. And then we'd just like to offer a few thoughts on generative AI, which is I think going to be important, but maybe is slightly sort of step back from the other three on the agenda here. So microservices. I mean, this is a very well-established concept now in the IT world, almost universally established. So, your IT people will love to talk about their technology stack, meaning all the different pieces, Lego bricks that they build up in terms of managing IT infrastructure and the applications that are available in any company, let alone insurance company. And so that enables us, as we build applications, to rather than just sort of say, let's go and buy a system, that the days of buying a system are largely over, and most applications are built up by what does the application need to do, what tools do we have available, which are the best ones that fit this particular application, and then how do we sort of piece together and add and configure the tools that we have in order to create the application. And so this kind of much more modular component-based process is much more flexible, but it's based fundamentally on connectivity, because all of these different pieces that can come from different companies, different developers, need to be able to connect and talk to each other. And so in an actuarial context, what does microservices for models mean? And this is something that I believe in very strongly as being something that we need to be better at as actuaries. That, essentially what we've got on the slide here is, I think, more of a dream than a reality in a lot of cases. That potentially there are lots of different data sources we can draw from. There are lots of different data tools we can use, Airtable, Snowflake, Databricks, to analyze data, and how good are we always at using these tools? Do we take advantage of what's available? And then on the right-hand side, as and when we report our results, I'm sure we're all familiar with Power BI, Tableau, the tools that are available in R, in Python, Streamlit, etc. Makes it really, really easy to use and very, very professional ways of presenting the information. And all very connectable to other systems. But as actuaries, are we using these kind of tools enough? But I think the reason we're not is because in the middle here, the calculation layer, we are still quite reliant on systems. And we're sort of struggling, I think, as a profession to kind of see how the systems that we've been using for many years, the new programming languages, the new kind of actuary-friendly programming languages like Julia and obviously R, Python, and how do these fit together with probably the most famous actuarial programming language of all, which is dear to our hearts, which is Excel. So how do these things all fit together? And at the moment, I do think this picture is aspirational. I don't think that microservices for models is quite yet a reality. But if it could be, it would be fantastic, because the whole point of continuous integration, continuous development is very, very established software development way of working, basically just meaning, again, that you build applications sort of component-wise, and so you can continually evolve your application, because you only have to make changes to particular components, test those components, and then just test that the system works collectively. So you can continually change and upgrade different parts of the ecosystem of the application without having to change everything all at once, and so test everything all at once, as used to happen in the days when you have a sort of kind of monolithic system. So this kind of much more flexible approach to software development, again, how can we carry that through to a much more flexible and continuous upgrade approach to developing and testing models that we're making? So CI/CD for models, again, is something that we see as being sort of fundamental to the actuary of the future, to Actuaries 3.0, if you like. All of this happening on the cloud. I think the last session mentioned quantum computing. I think that could be revolutionary, but it's not here today. But the cloud is here today, and the ability to run calculations in parallel, taking advantage of of 10, 100, maybe even 1,000, maybe thousands of separate threads, separate cores, separate processing units. So you can run, just by virtue of the fact that you're running models on the cloud, you can run the performance is way better than anything that we've sort of experienced in the past. And I don't think actuaries have yet taken advantage of this 100%. It's starting to happen, but not 100%. But it does mean that actuaries, I think, need to understand a little bit more about the way that scheduling models, architecting models works, and probably also need to understand a little bit more about the different skills that are needed for security on the cloud. The cloud can be very secure. The resources that AWS, Microsoft put onto the cloud are way beyond what any insurance company could provide in terms of cybersecurity investment. But equally, you're handing over that to a third party, and so I think understanding the implications of that is something that Actuary 3.0 needs to be able to do. So microservices for models, CI/CD, cloud, they all fit together. Generative AI, equally important, but a little bit distinct, I think. And I would be, I think, one of the people who would say that currently, although Gen AI is here today, it is a little bit overhyped. But equally, it would be foolish. It would be so foolish to write this off as something that's just a kind of a useful way of your kids doing their homework, because it is the investment, the research, the R&D that's going into Gen AI at the moment is just phenomenal, and there's no doubt that the fairly amazing things that are happening today will continue to improve. How do we stay on top of that to ensure that we're taking advantage of that in an actuarial context? I think the challenge is, a few thoughts here around what Gen AI is, but I think just maybe some practical examples. In our organization, in our company, in Coherent, I think broadly I'd say, had two tracks in terms of what we've done with Gen AI. One successful and one probably not so successful. The successful one is that the ability that we've seen to put a model, an Excel-based model, into a Gen AI model, and then basically produce a summary in English as to what the model is doing. We've had some, it's not 100%, but we've had some really good, initial tests in terms of being able to produce totally blind a summary of what the model is doing. I think we're developing this at the moment. I think this is going to be really quite interesting. Equally, where we've tried to use Gen AI to write models, so in other words, to actually sort of do coding, which I know is sort of seen as a big part of the future of Gen AI, we've seen that as being a bit less successful. And I think the reason for that is simply that we tend to see Gen AI as being a bit of an 80-20 situation, that it produces 80% of good stuff and 20% of not good stuff. And that's great when you're, say, writing a poem, because you can get a really good start at the poem, and then you can sort of build up from that. But it's maybe not so great if you're producing a model, because how do you know which is the correct 80% and which is the not correct 20%? And so that's the piece we're struggling with. But it is all about choosing your model. Not everything is ChatGPT. There's a number of different AI applications out there, and they all have got pros and cons. And I think this is something that we're going to see actuaries get more involved in future, but it's not quite there today in our view. So what is here today? And so we're just going to take you through a more specific example in how we see this microservices, CI/CD connectivity sort of coming into the real actuarial world. And to sort of focus in a little bit on the actual sort of tools that actuaries use to do modeling, to do the calculations. Actuary 1.0 was firmly in Excel. Actuary 2.0, is benefiting from the tremendous advances that have taken place in actuarial modeling systems. Actuary 3.0, how can those advances be taken to the next stage, where we start to be able to pick and mix between maybe the existing actuarial system, Excel, Python, and then plug this into data, plug this into reporting tools, automate these processes. I think we see with IFRS 17 how a lot of our modeling is really not very automated, and that's because we're not yet there at the Actuary 3.0 kind of connectivity level that is a key part, I think, of what's going on in the rest of the technology world at the moment with microservices. So maybe just a quick poll, if we could. Yeah. So who loves Excel?
Yeah, so for the poll, so this is how often do you use Excel? So in here we list 4 different options. So please participate in the poll. So I think once we have around like 100 participants to participate in this, I think we're gonna share the answers. So please participate. So the 4 choices we have is A, less than 1 month, B, about once a month, C, about once a week, and then D is at least once a day.
Okay, how should I see Mas here? So we have 58 who responded. Just let me know when you want to end the poll. Yeah.
We better
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah. You show the answers?
Yeah.
So the results. Yeah, I think we have about 92% of the participants use Excel on a daily basis. So I think that's pretty much consistent with what we see from the Casualty Actuarial Society poll. So yeah, so good to see a lot of the participants are using Excel on a daily basis. So thanks for participating.
So we ran this in KL at the Institute of Actuaries conference earlier this week, and we got 94%. So maybe Singapore is maybe a little bit more advanced than that in terms of moving away from Excel. But I think the point we're trying to make here, as Chelsea says, is that despite all of the problems that Excel has, all of the advantages that regular actuarial systems has, the actuarial profession simply cannot move away from Excel. Okay, so that's the reality. Excel is either you love it or you hate it, or both, but it's here to stay. And it's got great advantages. It's tremendously flexible, but equally it's tremendously dangerous. It's tremendously easy to make mistakes. It's tremendously easy to totally lose control of who owns the code, if you like. And so, it's something that is increasingly of concern to chief risk officers, to board risk committees, because it's basically, a dangerous tool in the wrong hands. And so this is why, the role of the more traditional actuarial system has taken off. These systems are more controlled, they are more rigorous, that they lock down calculations better than Excel can do. But sometimes I think we've kind of lost some of the flexibility that we had with Excel. Maybe that's a trade-off. Sometimes I think we maybe lose some of the transparency that we have with Excel. Maybe that's a trade-off. But I think most importantly, we don't have the connectivity. And so even though we've, in many ways moved from a Actuary 1.0 generation tool like Excel to an Actuary 2.0 generation tool like an actuarial system, it's still not giving us the kind of connectivity that modern technology really, should require. And that's where we see, the actuarial profession should go. Yeah. So I'm just conscious of time. We're going to do another poll, but let's maybe just give you an example of this. So how can Excel itself be turned into a microservice? And so Chelsea's just going to give you a quick demo. It's from our platform, but it's just an example of a microservice as to how Excel on the cloud can then connect into other software tools.
Okay, so before I start the Spark demo, let me first explain this Excel model we're using for today's Spark demo. So this is a very simple and straightforward term insurance valuation model that we have set up to reflect certain elements of Singapore RBC, which I'm assuming a lot of the audience might be very familiar with already. So on the policy tab, so this is where we have the inputs and outputs for this model. So for the inputs, we have, for example, age, gender, smoking status, premium term, sum assured, etc. So we listed three outputs on the right. So the outputs will include the reserve at the valuation date, there's a capital requirements, and then also the reserve at time one. So let me just quickly walk through all of these tabs. So this is where we store all of the different assumptions. So the assumptions we have include like mortality factor, lapse factor, expense ratio, solvency ratio, etc. And then in here we have some additional information such as the commission rate and then also the expense ratio. So just a note that this is not a so this does not reflect the full RBC requirements. So basically for illustration purposes, so we simply only reflect the stress test for the lapse rate for this model. So just as an FYI. So moving on this tab. So I'm not going to explain all of the details on here, but basically this tab reflects the cash flow on the best estimate basis. So in here, so this is where we do the stress test for lapse upgrade. So this is where we do the lapse down RBC stress test. So here we did the for C1, which is the insurance elements of Singapore RBC. So this is where we did the lapse up stress test. So this is where we had the lapse down. So on the very last tab, so this is where we store all of the mortality assumptions. So based on all of which these tabs, so we calculated the reserve at the valuation date, and these results. So before we upload this model to Spark, so I wanted to quickly explain Spark's naming convention, meaning that so if we upload this model to Spark, how can Spark tell what are the inputs and what are the outputs? So now let me introduce a Spark naming convention. So if you look at the name ranges here, so starting from here, we have some fields named as X input, and then some of these fields named as X output. So this is essentially the Spark naming convention. So if we name range one field as X input underscore something, Spark will take that and detect that as an input. So if we name something as X output underscore something, so Spark can detect that as the X output. So this is essentially how Spark can tell what are the inputs and then what are the outputs. So to name range this, so this is so as simple as we use Excel and then we name range under name manager. So yeah, so let me actually save this model and then I'll close it and then upload it to Spark. So this is Spark. So once you log into Spark, this is a screen that you're going to see. So each card in here represents one folder. So to create a new folder, you can simply click on create new folder here. And then all you need to do is to fill in some additional information. So which is actually very straightforward. So for today's demo, I'll just use one existing folder. I'll use my Chelsea testing folder. So once you're inside this folder, so on the top left corner, so this is where you can see the folder overview. So it provides some very high level context about what this folder entails. And then moving to this section, so this is where we have the recent history. So one cool feature about Spark is that all of the activities performed within this folder will be logged automatically. So it provides very good audit trail purposes. So down below, so this is where I uploaded all my services. So you can see that these are the previous services I've uploaded. So for today's demo, let me just upload this new service. So you can either drag and drop the file here, or you can browse and then find that file. So I'm going to browse. So this is the Excel model that I just explained, and then I'm going to upload that file. So essentially two things are happening in this step. So the first thing is actually trying to upload this model to Spark. And then the second step is once it's finished uploading, Spark is actually converting this Excel model and then the logic into codes, which is actually happening right now. So in here, you can define the service name and then the version control. So you can actually do version control here. And then you can also define like a different tag and then the effective days, etc. And then in here, you can see some high-level information about the service. For example, like how many sheets does it have and how many inputs and how many outputs, etc. So within about like 30 seconds or something, it finished upload already. So now I can click on publish and then this service will be published. Yep. So this is the API tester view where essentially users can do some unit testing. So just a few things to note on here. So this is the actual API endpoint that Spark has already created. So with this API endpoint about this service, you can use this endpoint and then integrate with the other systems. For example, you can integrate this with the policy admin system, or if you happen to use some RPA tools where you can actually integrate Spark with your RPA workflow. So all you need to do is to type this API endpoint into your workflow and then the integration will just happen. So yeah, so this is pretty neat. So moving to the bottom, so on the left-hand side, so this is where we have the inputs that Spark already detected. So recall that these are the names. So these are the inputs where those are labeled as X inputs. So if we hit submit, so on the right-hand side, so this is where we have the outputs. So you can see that based on the inputs I've entered into Spark, so Spark can already tell me like what are the outputs based on these inputs. So just as an example, let me change the age to be 50, and then I'm going to also change the smoker status to smoker. So hit submit. And then you can see that the results on the right-hand side will generate right away. So, so this is actually essentially running on the cloud, which means the computing power is actually way better than running things in Excel. So, so in the API call history, so I actually just ran 2 API calls. So you can see that under the API history, so the 2 calls are actually logged on here. So you can actually download all the API call history for your documentation purposes. So this part provides very good audit trail purposes. So lastly, so we also have the testing center. So in the testing center, so this provides very, so this can actually help you run batch testing. So as I was saying earlier, so this is running things on the cloud. So with running things on the cloud, the computation power is way better than running things in Excel. So this provides a very good platform for you to run some batch testing. So we also have version control. So currently we just uploaded 1 service. So let's say for your pricing calculator or for your BI model, so if there's any updates in the logic, so you can actually re-upload that service, and then you can see that all of the history, all of the version history are actually being logged on here. So yeah, so this is my very quick Spark demo, and then hopefully provides very good context about the example work.
So let me just maybe just by giving 1 or 2 examples of how this is sort of useful in reality. Yeah. Green? Yeah. So so essentially what Chelsea did there, just to emphasize why this is in tune with microservices CI/CD, is she's not running Excel on the cloud. She's turned Excel into a software asset in C++ actually, and then created a software asset with the same inputs and outputs that can now connect through the API to data sources, to reporting, to other models, etc. And so it's turned that Excel as simply a means of configuring a microservice, an actuarial model as a microservice, which again is then can be used with other systems, with other tools. And so this is part of, I guess, how we see just a practical example of how microservices can apply in the actuarial domain. So just wanted to sort of practical examples of this. This is one that we did. It was actually a Hong Kong example. Hong Kong is a bit behind Singapore. It's only just in the process of introducing a sort of proper risk-based capital regime. And so for the first time, actuaries in Hong Kong are having to incorporate TBOG calculations, cost of guarantees in pricing, etc. And so the actuaries have got the models that they know how to, they've got the cash flow projection models for the products they want to price. But for the first time, they're having to run those models hundreds, thousands of times in order to turn them into stochastic models. And the old Excel spreadsheets are no good for that. So the ability to replace an Excel spreadsheet with VBA looping it round with a software asset which can be run in batch, in parallel. So the run times come down dramatically. The days when actuaries have to run things overnight really should be over. The example here is a fairly typical one where we reduced a run time from 8.5 hours to under 2 minutes, and that's very typical. Second one, I talk a lot about how we can connect to other systems, but also models that are in microservices can connect to other models. So this is a process, it was an established process, crushed together in big Excel spreadsheets with actuaries copying and pasting between different from model 1 to model 2 to model 3. There was an asset model doing sort of forward interest rate projections. That then went into an asset portfolio projection model for the actual bond return, for the actual bond portfolio, sorry, incorporated risk assets, and then finally, in conjunction with cash flows, produced sort of various P&L metrics for all different products. So immensely, if you add up the number of permutations here, there are literally billions of simulations. And again, doing this in Excel, doing this as 3 manual processes, was just becoming ungovernable and frankly rather risky. In this case, we use Python to call the Spark API. So the API that Chelsea showed you, we just have a simple Python script that takes the results from model 1, puts it into model 2, takes it from model 2, puts it into model 3. But equally, we could have used a workflow tool. Probably an interesting example, could say a lot more about this, maybe next year we'll come back and talk about ESG, but one of the things we see actuaries that are getting involved in ESG projections is that the whole issue of climate modeling is fascinating, and I think going to be of increasing importance to actuaries, but the reality is we're still at very early days. And so, the data sources are moving around all the time, the actual modeling techniques are moving around all the time. We're still, to be frank, at a fairly immature phase in terms of modeling. And so, trying to spend too much time sort of fixing on a system, on a full final process just isn't sensible. Every year, your model's going to change. And so having the flexibility to, this is CI/CD in action, to really evolve your model on a continuous basis. And we could talk more about the example here, but I just really wanted to make the point that this is the whole area of ESG modeling, I think, is really right for this kind of more flexible approach to modeling rather than locking everything down into a single system. And then we were going to show you a demo of this, but I think we'd probably better conclude. Rather than using Python to stitch together models, in this case, we use a fairly common workflow data management tool, Alteryx, could use others. Alteryx calls the Spark API, takes data from one place, puts it into a Spark model, takes it out, moves it to a reporting system. It's really, we say it's easy, it really is very easy. And these are tools that, and I guess this is something I wanted to emphasize, these kind of tools are tools that actuaries are using every day. We'd encourage more actuaries to be using these tools every day. You don't need to be an expert programmer to use a lot of these tools that are available. Life is just a lot more fun, even at my age, learning some of these new tools, these new visualization tools, these no-code front-end tools. There's a world out there. We really encourage actuaries to use it, and that's, I think, what Actuary 3.0 is all about. So thank you very much. I think we've maybe got 2 minutes for questions. Sorry about that. Are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, I think yeah, everyone, if you have any questions, please type it into the chat. But I do have a question. Bob and Chelsea, so as you have mentioned here, Actuary 3.0 is probably the way to go. What are the key skills that you think Actuary can build to sort of move forward? Because the technology is always changing, and you have showed here that there's ESG that you can link up with, Alteryx and all. So what are the key skills that you think Actuary 3.0 should pick up?
I go first. Yeah. I mean, to me, it's what we tell our kids. It's growth mindset. Yeah, we sit here lecturing our children around growth mindset. How much of a growth mindset do we really have? You know, honestly, and I think, you know, again, this is, you know, by all means, you know, go and do a course, learn Python. But by all means, you know, do a course, learn all about machine learning. But to me, these are just examples. The key is really to be open-minded around what are you doing in your job? What tools, you know, could you think about, could you learn about that would enable you to do that job in a more Actuary 3.0 way? And a lot of the time, the tools are easy to use. We just need to know they're there. You know, we just need to be open to using them.
Yeah, so I would have like similar ones. So using your around technology and tools, and collectively see that, you know, if those are the tools that you can actually use in your daily life, in your daily job, and then trying to improve efficiency. So yeah, so I think that's, I would say, like, always be curious about learning new tools and technology. So.
And that's fun. This is exciting, guys. This is the future. Let's embrace it.
Yeah, I think thanks for sharing that. I think certainly the growth mindset and then being open-minded about new technology. I think as you have shared in your presentation earlier, generative AI is also not just about ChatGPT. There's other aspects of sort of AI that we can also look into. I see that we are sort of right on time. I'm afraid I have to sort of close the conference. Otherwise, we sort of go overboard and run out of time.